course, I would always get the credit, but the person that really deserved the credit was Scott up in Tallahassee. Jason does a fantastic job, but the legwork that's being done is by your daughter, and she is doing fantastic. So I just wanted to let you know that. May I bring Kelly Brown up to kind of address that? I think so. Kelly is not just our Director of Exemptions. At one point, she was, I believe, Chief of Staff to Senator Campbell. And there's a number of pieces of legislation that we propose every year, and Kelly basically drafts them all. And she's actually been successful the past few years in actually passing legislation. Kelly, can you address the question that came up?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thank you very much. I've actually done some work with your daughter. I didn't know she was Senator Pizzo's aide. She's wonderful. As a former legislative aide, she is doing the hard work. Yes, House Bill 7017. It does have it's the Save Our Homes CPI percentage, or 3%, whichever is higher per annum. It's been 3% for the past several years. It can be less. It's a maximum of 3% annually. There is no cap on that. It will have a nominal impact each year, so it is an incremental increase. It's an average of $5.60 per household this year, and so on and so forth. $153,000 in tax revenue impact specifically to the city of Hollywood this year. But you're correct, there is no cap on that. So that would be a similar impact per annum annually per household on that $25,000.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. Oh, thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Does anyone else have any other questions? Well, you all are awesome. I just want to thank you all so much again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you everybody up here. I really appreciate it. I have to tell you, I feel very excited also when I see Kevin, everybody, but Adelma up here as well. Linda, Tracy, Adam, Carol, everybody here is fantastic. And I love the fact that when I was on the county commission, Delma was there, and I love the fact that she took her skills as serving at the county commission level as an aide to Beam to hear to the people of Hollywood. It actually is just, I just think it's fantastic. Very proud of you. I just wanted to say that.
I'm proud of you.
Thank you very much. With that said, thank you all so very much for having me today. You all are wonderful, and I'm looking forward to coming back in a few months, and I'll have some very, very, very big numbers for you at that time. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you again, Marty. So before we dive into the presentation, City Manager wanted to just give a couple brief introductions of some folks we have with us today, and then we will dive into the presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan. So two brief introductions, as Jonathan says this morning, on two key new members of our staff here in the city who haven't even started yet, but out of their own interest, they're here. So I wanted you to get a chance to see them and say hello. Stephanie Tinsley is our new Finance Director. Stephanie? And Chris Roschek is our new CRO. Thank you. Appreciate that opportunity.
All right.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much. So welcome again to our fiscal year 2025 kickoff. I am Jonathan Antista, the Director of the Office of Budget and Performance Management. And 2025 is a big year for the city. It's not just our 100-year anniversary as we look back to the past 100 years and we look forward to the next 100 years. But it's a big year for all of the programs and services that we have been delivering thus far and that we're excited to be delivering in the future for our residents, for our visitors, and for our businesses as the city continues to grow and provide world-class, robust, responsive services to the needs of our residents, to the needs of our businesses, and to the needs of our visitors. And this kickoff every year as part of the budget process is an important part of us looking at the budget each year. That's how we find those priorities. That's how we make sure the budget meets the needs that the commission is hearing from all of our residents, that our directors and everyone on staff hears. And that's what we start with today. And so in order to make sure we're looking ahead and understanding what's coming, we want to start by looking a little bit backwards. As we said, 2025 is a big year. And so we want to begin by saying sort of where have we been? What have we been doing? So that we can keep an eye on places where we need to do more of what we're already doing, places we may need to change or update, or new things we want to add and do that we're hearing from our residents, that we're hearing from our businesses, that need to be done in the budget as we build the FY 2025 budget. So, as you know, we're in the middle of right now of doing a revamp of our strategic plan. What you see on the screen here is this is the strategic plan as it exists right now. And this plan, as the new one will do, guides our work. It guides our decisions, it guides our programs, it guides what staff does, what all of our departments do. Everything ties back to this. It gives us that guidebook. And so we wanted to start here by, again, pointing out our vision, South Florida's top city, to live, learn, work, invest, and play, with a mission of a thriving community where quality of living is available to all. And this, along with the core values and the strategic focus areas, this has, again, been guiding that work up to this point. And so we wanted to highlight what this sort of has looked like up until now. So again, we can sort of see where we've been and get an understanding of what's out there. So I wanted to start with, last week, commissioners, you received our FY 2023 performance measure report. And the performance measures come from the strategic plan. Every department has a list of performance measures. And performance measures do a couple of different things. Some performance measures are informational. So for example, our police vacancy rate. This helps us understand, are we staying fully staffed at the police department? So the police department can track, do they need to hire more folks, more officers, where's that missing? So some of the performance measures we look at are informational, helping our departments know where they're performing, what's going on, what are they providing, are people participating? Some of them are more performance metrics. What is being done? So for example, at the bottom here, the number of participants registered in all of our parks, recreation, and cultural arts programs. So here we can see, and it's been increasing year over year over year. So this measure tells us, wow, like we are reaching a lot of residents, a lot of people are participating in our programs. And that's an important measure to look at and say, are we providing everything to the residents? But it also is a guide, because it's a question. So we're seeing all these folks, are they enjoying the activities? Are they getting a lot out of the activities? Are they showing up and then saying, we don't want this activity anymore? So performance measures tell us information, but they also guide us in asking questions. Because sometimes a performance measure can just be spot on and be that informational, that piece of information, how many police calls, how many fire calls. It could be that performance measure that helps us say, like, okay, are our programs reaching? Are all of these participants in one part of the city or in multiple parts of the city? And those performance measures at the department level guide that work and help us understand what the departments are doing. But they're also only a point in time. Sometimes a performance measure can say, wait, there might be something going on. Sometimes we have control over those factors, and many times we do not. So, if there's a supply chain issue and we weren't able to fix an elevator, for example, in the time that we set, the performance measure can tell us that, but also make sure that we're then asking the next question down. Why is this happening? Is there something we can do to fix it? Is it something outside of our control? And we put all that information into these performance measures. And then each year, as part of the budget process, those performance measures are revised and updated and changed. Do we still need to measure this? Are we measuring the right thing? And we ask those questions. Beatrice, our performance manager who runs this program, does an excellent job working with the departments to identify those performance measures and make sure they're staying up to par, that we're measuring what we need to measure, we're measuring what we want to measure, and that we're capturing the right questions as we do so. So those will be revised as part of the budget process, as they are each year. And this year, as part of the revamp of the strategic plan, we're also going to be looking at some citywide or cross-departmental performance measures, because there are a whole lot of things the city does. We've been pushing for collaboration and cross-departmental things and programs and services and making sure that everyone is working together. And so we want to make sure there are also performance measures that don't just fall in one department, that might fall across departments, and we want to make sure we're measuring those as well and continuing to improve those. So our performance measures, again, are an important guide. Here was FY 2023. We put out a quarterly report on measures throughout the year. So we're finishing up the Q1 report now. And again, all throughout the year, we can monitor these items. Are our departments meeting what we've set out for them to do? And additionally, as the city manager mentioned a little while ago, and as you all have seen, we've been doing a lot of things as a city. This is just a small sampling of the number of things in that FY 2023 accomplishments report that the city was able to accomplish in FY 2023 alone. And this is outside of some of the normal things that we do, but you can see we added there were additional sworn officers, increased security at the beach. We had 183 residents who received workforce training. We completed the Hollywood Boulevard Complete Streets. All of these programs, the finishing of sidewalks, the resurfacing of alleys and roadways, This is a lot of work that's going on in the city. All of this has to be funded, some by our general fund, some by grants, some by other entities, but all of this is part of that work. All of these programs, all of these projects are done by the incredible staff we have here in the city who make these things happen. But as part of the budget process, we have to make sure we're identifying what those needs are and we're funding them as best as we can, given some of the limitations or resources that we may have. So, of course, how are we able to do all of these wonderful things that the city has done and will continue to do this year and beyond? As Marty just talked about, it comes from that taxable value. And you can see year over year, we've been seeing that significant growth, all the way up to the $23.2, $23.3 billion of value we saw for this fiscal year. A $7 billion increase from 2019. And in that development, that growth in revenue, in new sales, all of these things drive that revenue. Our largest revenue source, our property taxes, are driven by this. And with this in mind, this is an important guide again, because we have to keep an eye on what these revenues are doing. We have to, to be prudent managers of the city's finances and of the city's taxpayers, we have to keep an eye on where this growth is going. Are there warning signs? Are there red flags? Because we have to be prepared. But the growth is an important part that drives that increase in values and enabled us to invest in all those things, to put new and more officers on the street, to buy new equipment and new fire trucks and those kinds of things that we were able to do to provide for the city. And so that increase in taxable value is incredibly important. It helps, again, to drive so many of our ability to invest in all the things that we need to do, that we hear from you and from the residents that need to happen. All of that is driven by this. And to dig into just a little bit more detail, here you can see that increase for this fiscal year. So there's that $23.2, $23.3 billion number of taxable value, a significant increase compared to 2023, over just under $2.5 billion. And you can see here from the slide, we saw a lot of that increase, 14.2% increase in our single family, 14.3% in our multifamily, 12.7% in our condos. So in our residential areas, those sales that Marty was talking about are an important factor here. Those new sales that reset the values of some of those homes are critical to that growth. And we saw similarly high, but a little bit less in some of our commercial and some of our industrial areas. But those new sales, driven by the market, but also driven by what we provide here as a city. All those accomplishments, all those programs, all those great things that we do, not just drive things for our current residents, but also encourage people to move here, to become part of our community, and to participate and partake in all the things that we provide. And so those also attract them. We saw that in some of those new sales. But sales alone are not enough to continue to grow that value, as we know. New development, changes in development, new programs and projects that come on board, they are an important part of driving up of those increases to that value. And unfortunately, as we saw this past year, the value of our new construction was a very small piece, only about $55 million for FY 2024. And without that new construction, if sales slow, if sales don't go the same way that we are predicting or that we envision them going, new construction can help balance those things. That both sides of that coin help to increase that value. And so while we didn't see a huge increase in new construction in FY24, we do see, as you can see, this sampling of development projects that are either completed, Marty mentioned a couple there at the top that are coming onto the tax rolls, as well as the ones that we have planned or that are under construction or are beginning their process. As all of these come on board, and it takes time, as we know, it takes a good amount of time, but these new developments are going to help change that new construction number as they come on board, as they start to be part of our tax roll. And so again, both sides of that coin are important. What are sales doing, but also where is that development? Where is that new construction? How is that taxable value growing? So again, we look back where we were in FY23, what did we accomplish? What did we invest in? How did our departments perform? And that has led us to FY 2024 and the investments we have been able to make in this current fiscal year. So this is just a sampling again of some of the things, and this is not the ongoing things that we do. These are the new things that we were able to add as part of the FY24 budget. So we have our new Director of Public Safety and the program that he is putting together, our new Chief Resiliency Officer and the program that's being put together there. As well as you can see, we had 8 new officers, we had increased security at the Broadwalk, increases to our cybersecurity programs. A fitting subject today is the AT&T outage. We'll see what that turns out to be. We are making all of those investments. and as well as, again, those programs and services that we provide our residents. So for including in our building department, in our permit department, and the new permitting system that is now in the process of coming on board. So we wanted to briefly, I'm gonna turn it over to Andrea, and she'll give a brief update on that.
Ooh, excuse me. Good morning. So one of our major initiatives or investments that the commission has asked us to do is to implement a new building permitting software system called Acela. And it's important to remember that this software isn't just for building, but it will also be used by engineering, planning, portions of public utilities. The fire department also will be assisting. They look at permits and have a regulatory responsibility as well. The first year of this investment is about a $2 million investment, and we're really excited to be going live with a portion of our permits this summer. We have about 9 different permits that we'll be going with live, and then we will phase in the remaining divisions over the next year to bring those to fruition as well. Another item that we're looking at is seeing how we could better balance the needs of the community as well as investment in property, and looking at our site plan review process and how we could better manage construction within the city. So we want to look at increasing the administrative approval that staff has for projects. We also want to look at how we're engaging the public in the process and that public participation component, and how we're noticing the public to be able to contribute and provide their feedback to new construction within the city. And one of the major things that we've had over the last few years, as you could see, is our staffing. Over the last 3 years, we have steadily increased our full-time available positions. We've had about a 25% increase in full-time positions within the department. And we're really, our goal over the next few years with Acela, with the staffing positions, is to really try to right-size the regulatory and the construction process and improvements within the city. So we do still supplement with consultants, and we do have a variety of part-time positions as well. We have about 15 within the department currently. So those are some of our major things we're looking at next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And so, we talked about the operating side. Andrea, thank you again for that update on the Acela permitting system and what it's going to be able to do, again, as we provide those robust services. So we mentioned some of the operating initiatives that were part of the budget in FY 2024, and this slide just highlights some of the capital investments. We have a very robust capital program that we've been slowly and steadily increasing year over year. And this represents our CIP. This, for example, does not include our GOB projects that we know are ongoing and are an important part of drivers of development and growth and important projects for our city. But again, you can see some of the highlights here. Our biggest area is with our Department of Public Utilities and the infrastructure needs that we have over there. And so, in this year alone, we've been able to look at sewer expansion, various improvements and upgrades at the water treatment plant, as well as just continuing to address the underlying infrastructure piece by piece, so that we are making sure those systems are operating at the best that they can. On other facilities, we've been doing ADA upgrades, garage repairs. University Station is a big development, big new parking that is coming, and a big new development that is coming. That was part of part of our CIP. As we look at streets and sidewalks, as well as our public safety departments. We were able to purchase a new fire engine and get new beach safety vehicles so that we can respond faster, that we can be prepared in an emergency, and that we are ready, and we're not waiting until the end of the lifeline of many of our equipment before we're able to replace new ones. And having that robust development, having those new sales, driving that taxable value, all of those pieces help us to meet these infrastructure needs, which we know are great and many and changing. And that maintenance is another important part. We've been making huge investments in a lot of infrastructure between the city, between the CRA, and as those projects finish, as those investments wrap up, the next phase we as a city need to look at, and us as on the financial management side, what are those maintenance costs? What are those costs year over year? What are the lifespan of those items, so that we are preparing for when we need to replace them again? so that we continually stay ahead and don't fall behind in those critical infrastructure pieces. So those two sides of the budget, the operating side, which we had a lot of investments in, and our capital side, which are huge changes that are important for being able to continue to provide those services for our residents. So with that said, as I said, sort of where we are, we're here today to talk about FY 2025 and looking ahead to what's coming. So we wanted to highlight over the next couple of slides some of the things that we are keeping an eye on, whether those are local factors, international factors, economic factors. There are a lot of things that have an impact on the budget that we have control over, and a whole lot of things that we do not. And so, for example, on our personnel side, we have ever-increasing health insurance costs. As we heard in the commission meeting yesterday, though the growth in healthcare has been tremendous. With the new employee health clinic, we're looking to bend that cost curve because those health insurance costs are very expensive. And everything we can do to bend that cost curve, every employee who can go to the clinic for those services and help us get those costs down are going to be a huge important factor for managing those costs, a huge, huge personnel cost for the city. The other, of course, is our pension plans. We're going to have Dave Keller in a few minutes is going to talk about the pension plans in a little bit more detail, but something we monitor, those increasing annual contribution payments are a huge part of our city budget. And they grow every year, and they're volatile to the stock market, and all of those items that right off the bat take a huge piece of money out of the funds, so that we can provide that benefit to our residents, to our employees, and it helps us to attract those employees. But we have to be cognizant of what those costs are. We have to understand where they're going, so that we are, again, managing the entire city's budget as appropriately and as fiscally responsibly as we can. As we look at the operating side, over the next couple of years, we're looking at the transition of the CRAs. You're going to see in a few slides, when we get to the 5-year forecast, this causes a little bit of wonkiness in our numbers as we reset and bring the CRA money back in, but also bring those services and some, if not all of those employees back in. All of those, that transition is going to change the way the city operates. And we are in the middle of that process that will be going on over the next couple of years. It is going to have an impact on all sides of our budget. And of course, we're also still dealing on the operating side with the impacts of inflation, with supply chain shortages, which is also something we deal with on our capital side. And of course, our residents want, need, demand, and deserve the services that they're asking for. And we have to look at all of those things, weigh all of those things, and understand all of those things, because the more expensive they are, and the more that we're being asked to do, the more we have to be better stewards of those dollars. Because those dollars only go so far. There's only so much of them every year. And the more we can be aware of those things year over year, the more we can look at what we're doing that is absolutely necessary, look at areas where maybe programs are outdated. All of those pieces are critical to managing the budget within that defined and limited set of resources. And again, as I said, on the capital side, that inflation, supply chain issues, you've seen it in the commission meetings as projects have come back with increased costs. And of course, as I mentioned, the maintenance piece. This is a big one for us as we really look ahead, not just 2025, but beyond. All of those great investments we've been doing, all the roads we've been resurfacing, all the projects and buildings and things that have been coming on board, streetlights, all of those things require maintenance. And we have to make sure that we're not just building new and creating new and putting in new, but that we're maintaining that new. And again, that we're preparing for what the life cycle of those items are, so that we're not scrambling at the end, but we're on a schedule that replaces it. And that's what we're looking at to make sure that the CIP isn't just funding all those new things, but is also maintaining everything we've just invested in, so it doesn't cost us, X times more the next time we come around. So outside of us, there are, of course, things that we don't control. There are a lot of economic forces that are out there. Inflation continues to be a big one. I'll point here to the chart on the right. This is the change in CPI for the United States in green compared to the Miami metropolitan area, which includes Broward County, which would include obviously Hollywood. And so you can see when it comes to food in the middle there, our CPI is about the same as average the rest of the country. But when it comes to energy, a lot of the country saw a reduction in prices, and we are seeing an increase in prices. That affects our residents, that affects our city operations. That is something we need to be aware of. On the other side, that's our unemployment rate. And you can see, again, the green is, in this case, the green is December 2022, and the blue is December of 2023, the most recent time we have data from. And you can see we've actually been seeing an increase, particularly in Broward County, but also in my Miami area overall, in that unemployment rate. That doesn't mean necessarily that unemployment is thriving. A whole lot more people might be entering the job market. All of those things have an impact on that unemployment rate. But it's an important measure for us to keep an eye on as we attract businesses, as we attract jobs. All of those factors are important. And again, all these things have an impact on us. What the Fed does on interest rates has an impact on what we borrow and the interest rates we pay on certain things. And also the costs of doing business, the cost of contracts that we have, the cost of purchasing things, all of those are impacted by those rate hikes and by that inflation. Of course, there's, the stock market is volatile, as we know. It's been sometimes up, sometimes down. All of those things, that has a huge impact on our pension and on that ARC payment. And not just for 1 year, but for years and years in the future. If there's a bad stock market year on the pension side, that impact continues year over year over year that we have to address and deal with. And so we have to keep an eye on those things. And of course, the international turmoil that we're facing, the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, the war between Russia and Ukraine, all of these things have an international global supply chain impact, have a global international cost impact, and eventually trickle down and have an impact on us and what we're able to purchase, when we're able to purchase it, and how much those things cost. So all of those items impact the budget and what we're able to provide, again, with those limited resources that we have. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave for a brief update on our pensions.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. Morning. So a couple weeks ago, the mayor was doing some reading and some research, and he came across some interesting articles, and that resulted in him sending Adam and some other folks an email asking several questions. And as occasionally happens, Adam forwarded it to me and said, let's get some answers to these, will you? So,
Sorry, David.
not a problem. That's why we're here. So, in essence, the three questions, the article that the mayor read said that a good metric, a healthy metric for the annual required contributions, or otherwise known as ARC, A-R-C, is a range of about 15 to 20% of the total general fund in a municipality. So the mayor asked a couple questions. One, where is Hollywood in terms of the ratio between the ARC contributions and the general fund? Two, can we do a projection based on recent history and find out what our likely growth is? And three, if that projection shows us that we would be in excess of 20%, what would we need to do in terms of the millage rate to increase revenues to get us back to that 20%? So,
Not the millage rate, the total assessed value, total appraised value.
they're related.
You know how I feel about millage rates. Go ahead.
So we took a look from 2017 up through 2024 and did some projections. Now, when you have relatively few data points like that, how can you do a projection that's going to end up having some credibility and be reasonable to it? Well, the way you do it is you do multiple projection techniques. So we took a look and did 3 different techniques and then used the average of the projections. We did a statistical straight-lined trend projection, a year-over-year average increase, and then a beginning to end point compounding percentage projection, and averaged the results of those 3. Everything else in terms of revenues and expenditures for the general fund are from the 5-year forecast that budget produces. So what's interesting, some of the interesting results are that the mean average increase or growth over the last period of years is 3.9% for the police pension fund, 1.2% for the general employees pension fund, and 6.1% for the fire annual required contribution. Those annual required contributions, by the way, come from reports that are done by actuaries for each of the pension funds. So the actuaries do a valuation, then they issue a report and tell the city, this is the minimum amount that you have to pay. Based on the assumptions and the projections that we just described, the city's combined ARC is projected to be below 25% for the next 5 years. However, in order for it to be, it would reach about 23.2% by 2029. So in order for the ARC to be at 20% of the general fund, ad valorem revenues, and you can take this to say ad valorem revenues or the millage rate or the growth in assessed value, because they're related, would have to be about 1.6% or $2.9 million higher in FY26 than is projected in the 5-year forecast, growing to 4.7% or $9 million in FY27, and 5.1 or $10.3 million in FY28, and 6% or $12.5 million higher in FY 2029. So you can see it's growing. We're currently at 19.4%, growing to 19.7%, 20.8, 22.5, 22.7, and 23.2%. Again, this assumes that all the other revenues and expenditures are as projected in the 5-year forecast. So what does that mean in terms of growth? It means that we would need to bring in an extra $12.5 million by 2029. Now, assuming the growth in the assessed valuation is as projected in the 5-year forecast, it would mean that we would need to increase millage rate to generate additional dollars. And over the course of that period, it would have the millage rate changing from 7.4665 up to 7.9153. So as you all know, there's only a couple pieces in our puzzle. If we don't get it in growth in the valuation of property, then we need to look at the millage rate. Those are the two pieces of the jigsaw that we have to work with. I want to add some additional information, and this is a good news note. In the early 1990s, the city did what is called an ERIP program. It stands for Early Recentive Retirement Program. And basically what that program is, it says, if you're getting close to retiring, go ahead and retire now. We'll give you a pension early, or possibly some other benefits, like maybe we'll give you health care early now until the time that you're eligible for Medicare and Medicaid. But there's an incentive to get people out of the city. And the theory is when you get those people off the personnel roster, that you don't fill the positions again. However, having them retire early has an impact on the pensions, because they are now entering the pension side of being retired earlier than projected by the actuaries. So this happened in the city in the early 90s, and part of the general employees' contribution of $26 million this current year, about $11 million of that is attributable to that ERIP program in the early 90s. As you all know, those payments are spread out over a period of years, and in the case of the General Employees Pension Fund, that ERIP program payment will cease 6 years from this year. So in 2030, everything else being considered equal, we will see about an $11 million drop in the general employees' required contribution. So that's some good news. It's just outside the scope of our 5-year projection here, but in 2030, we will get some good news in the terms of about an $11.2 million decrease in the general employees' pension. Jonathan?
Can I ask a question?
Sure, Commissioner Biederman?
Thank you. In the general employees, $15 million estimated contribution, does that include our enterprise funds like utilities, parking, and
Their payment in part.
utilities and parking?
No, these are payments that are made, that the city must make
I
directly to the
get
pension
that,
fund.
but we have general employees in utilities
Oh,
and in parking
okay,
that
no.
we pay pension contribution
The
to.
total for the general employees is 26.2 million. The general fund portion of that is 15 million.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
this is higher $11 million. So that's what I figured. We were about 80 plus million dollars on total ARC. If,
Just over 81
But
in the
there's
current year.
$400 million more on the other funds. So the extra 11 is attributed to that other 400 million.
right. So in other words, this pie and these three, totals
It's just the
are really larger.
Yes.
In terms of total cost, when you consider what.
That's correct.
Commissioner Peterman pointed out.
Yeah, the pie that you see is just attributable to the general fund.
And I think that this is more accurate, prior to you being the finance director, they used to use the 60% of our general fund went to the pensions, which was, a scare tactic. So I think that when we're talking about the 20% to 23%, I think that's more accurate and it's more of an accurate comparison. So I appreciate, sometimes you work on things over the years, just like we got the health clinic yesterday. You work on changing the messaging over the years, and I appreciate the fact that we're coming around on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, the general fund share of the general employees' pension ARC is about 58% of the total number.
Yeah. So David, just wanted to, and thank you for providing this analysis for everyone. Clearly, we know that the pension expenses and the ARC are a significant chunk. Just imagine where Hollywood would be if we would have an $80 or $70 million, or at least in this way of looking at it, expense. If the tax base didn't grow from 13 to 23 billion, we'd be in real trouble. And you mentioned that we needed to add, for example, $12 million a year to get to, I guess, maintaining this 23.2% in.
No, total.
That would bring us from 23.2 back down to 20%.
Back down to 20. So the more ideal, sustainable sort of ratio of pension expense to the budget. And just for the sake of everyone understanding, and you all probably do, to earn an extra $8 million in property ad valorem revenue to the city, that's $1 billion of growth. So every billion is about, with our millage rate, about $7.5 million to $8 million that we bring in, roughly. So it's going to take, billions of additional growth to even earn what we can figure in the small piece of looking at these huge numbers. Just to get $8 million in, it means $1 billion of growth. So it's in the billions, and that's always where our focus is. Where is the challenge? Because I want the city to be on good economic footing, and know what is our goal then from a assessed value standpoint, to the extent we can control and encourage its growth, to get us to be, financially and fiscally, sustainable and
Yes.
in a
Yeah,
secure
you're right,
way.
Mayor.
And so,
That's-
do you have a number of where the property total assessed value, right now we're at 23.2, ought to be in order to get us to 20% or to the 23? Did you mention that, or did you not look at total, assessed value?
No, but we can calculate that.
That's a
for
goal
you.
that I like to keep in my mind. When I first
Absolutely.
came in, I said, let's take us from 13 to 18 billion, and we surpassed that in 4 years. Tell me where we need to be in 5 years for the sake of good fiscal management. You can write us back. So I just have this goal in my head of where we need to be to keep things, strong.
We'll get that for you. Mayor.
Mayor,
Yep.
Mayor, is this on? Along those lines, when we looked at page 10, where we have the sampling of development projects under construction, there's a ton of projects there, and then even more planned, including the Diplomat, the Tropic, things like that. So, if we were just to add up the value of the projects listed as not completed yet on page 10, I'm curious if you overlay that, where this grid would be. Would we be under 20% if we included the projects now under construction? Or does that chart already include the value of the projects under construction?
We will take a look and get the answer back to you as well, and find out what the 5-year forecast includes in terms of growth in assessed valuation, and whether these projects exceed that or not.
Okay, and then my other question is, and I'm sitting next to the expert here, but as older retirees pass and younger retirees come into the program, isn't it so that the expense per retiree drops a little bit? So is that included in this projection? That newer retirees coming in are less expensive than the older retirees coming out?
That's factored in because the projections are based on the changes. So we're seeing those changes year over year already in the past 8 years.
Okay. And then finally, in the city's darkest financial years, what was the ratio of the ARC to the general fund?
Don't know the answer to that. I will get it for you.
Thank you.
Mayor, is it okay?
Sorry.
If I speak? She's done. So, I think that's a really great, scenarios to find out, from page 10, what's planned to come, and place that, like you know, how you guys do your graph, so an overlay of what's coming and what monies that will generate. Right? Obviously, it's all projected. And then, if possible, for a better understanding, even, I know we usually do 5-year forecast, right? But we're all here to leave a legacy and leave the city in good hands. So, up to 29, and then how do you sustain that and keep going? Because it's only going to continue to grow, right? So, whether it's revamping the city on certain projects, enhancing them, building more, looking at changing, like, for example, La Piazza, which is on here, you know, that's something that we're going to be able to generate additional income and ad valorem tax and so forth. So, you know, as we always talk about vision and strategic planning, like, what would it look like, let's say, you know, even further? I think would be a really positive impact to go with. And in addition to that, if we could have that opportunity to see if the market were to decrease, which we all know what goes up must come down, and the risk that we have. So if you could have another line to show if there were a trend to start going down, and then have those comparisons, because then that gives us a better way to really plan for the future and the what-ifs, because you always have to plan for those what-ifs, because if you don't, then you're caught and you're in trouble. As far as the pensions go, with the, you know, unfortunate passing of individuals, obviously, that's life. With us doing our new clinic, hopefully they'll live longer, so we also have to prepare for that. In addition,
That's a great point, saving money off of clinic.
right, so I think that there's a lot of different moving parts that, you know, I just see like, you know, the clear transparency paper, they put it all together so we can find that medium and just move towards it. So
Absolutely.
I think it would be really valuable.
2 comments on your points there, Commissioner. First of all, in terms of down markets, I just wanted to give you some comfort there. 2 things. First of all the pension funds do a multi-year smoothing. So to the extent that either a down market or an up market happens, they amortize those benefits or those losses over 5 years so that the city doesn't take a sort of a big hit. And that definitely helps cushion any changes in the market. The second thing is, George and I both sit on the General Employees Pension Board, and we strive to diversify the investments to protect ourselves so that we can really benefit during an up market, but also when there are down markets, we really diversify ourselves into an amazing different variety of asset classes so that we can protect ourselves. And we're actually very successful. Just a couple of years ago when we saw a really bad market, the General Employees Pension Fund
100%.
we were in the top several percentiles we did like in the top 2 or 3% in the United States in terms of performance in cushioning against
And I
down
think that
markets.
that's really important to let everyone know, because I remember during those tragic times that we faced, we heard a lot of that, how a lot of while it looks like some people will say depleting our funds, they also were there to help us during our hardest times. So, you know, there's a give and take with everything, so thank you so much.
Absolutely.
David, to Commissioner Caleri's point, real quick about the funds and helping the city out by reducing, I think it's the percentage, the 7% of, for example, the police pension fund is, I guess, smoothing to have as the benchmark, which some might argue is a little low and ought to be 8%. Like I think some of the fire and the other funds, you know, require the city in terms of calculating the annual required contribution. So there's some risk as well. And I don't mean to risk it in a negative way, some reality in a way that if they increase, their benchmark contribution from 7 to 8%, what does that mean to the ARC? And what does that mean toward, the city's necessity for, ad valorem growth? We also are looking at this in a little bit of a silo here, considering what the pension contributions are vis-a-vis the general fund and a ratio and a percentage to say it's a sustainable rate. But add on top of this what you guys presented before, which is the OPEB and the healthcare expense, which is expected to grow 5% annually for the next 5 years, as far as last information I have, and salaries and wages 3% over a year for the next 5 years. And so, in the end, combining all of these fixed expense, factors, OPEB, pension, salary, what have you, and then looking at, obviously the health of the general fund and where the general fund needs to be so that we continue to have opportunities to invest in the city and not be, cash poor in the future.
Yep.
Again, all of that helps us decide, as we throttle and we understand how big the tax base needs to grow, because that's the only thing that we can really, I think for the most part, really enjoy the growth of without it being a fee, that we would be increasing, or a millage rate, God forbid, for the city. Again, it all amounts to, how much does the city need to grow to keep it on a sustainable financial footing, given the expenses that we cannot control or otherwise need to improve. For example, the police pension fund is only funded at, I think, 40-some-odd%, and that's the lowest one out of the three. And they've been artificially, I think, reducing the ARC, coming out of financial urgency. And so if they were to true up that contribution to where maybe we're contributing to the other funds, to make that fund more healthy at a long-term, level, because we're in that, responsibility as well. All these things need to come through, and so I'm really looking forward to your projection on where the tax base needs to be, because that'll affect how hard we need to throttle or how hard we don't need to throttle, the tax base growth. I just want to know, again, where we are, and so
Absolutely.
looking forward to all that.
To the point you just brought up,
Yep.
Mayor, it's interesting. So the three different pension funds each have different assumed rates of return, which is what you're talking about. Now, the state is sending back information and letters to pension funds all across the state saying, these numbers are unrealistic, and we will not consider these as balanced portfolios unless you start decreasing those assumed rate of returns. They're telling pension funds, you have a year or two to start getting your numbers down, and the state is telling people currently that 7% may be on the high side.
And that's a direct impact, because we
That will be a
are
direct
enjoying that high assumption. And if it's reduced,
Right.
then it's millions and millions more.
The-
And
the
when you
hi-
consider
yes,
that
that's
$1 billion only equals $7.5 to $8 million, and these can jump with that number as soon as you change that assumption rate, then we have a lot to be aware of and take into consideration. Doug?
I see the city, oh,
Yep. The city attorney.
The early 90s, I was scared. Okay, so just so you all know, from what I recall, and please tell me if I'm wrong here, but what I recall when I was here, there was a big push for that. And what we found wasn't really what was expected. I don't think the program was as successful as the city had wanted. What had happened was, from what I remember, a lot of younger people actually took advantage of it and retired in their 40s and 40s, and now are receiving the pension. And for those positions, for those positions that were eliminated, we had to hire a lot of those types of positions back. Again, and now the new employment compensation package that was necessary. So it really didn't have the impact they wanted it to have.
Thank you. That's a great point.
Doug, you're 100% correct. Actually, when you do an ERIP program, to a certain extent, it shifts costs from personnel over to pension. But ERIP programs only work if you cannot refill those positions. What happened was that ERIP program was so aggressive because the city was trying to save a lot of money, so they were really encouraging people to go, take it, and leave. What happened was, in subsequent budget years, like I remember the Department of Public Utilities coming in and saying, more than 50% of our mid-managers are gone. We can't operate like that. Your office, Pat, saying her office got wiped out. But the problem was that in order to make the ERIP program work, you had to make sort of a guarantee that you weren't going to refill those positions. So it made for some really silly kinds of budgeting episodes where we might have had a person in Public Utilities Code or Public Works called a maintenance manager. Well, we couldn't refill a maintenance manager, so we created a new position called manager of maintenance. And that's how we got around it. And there were citizens out there watching. There were citizens out there with a list of all the positions that retired, and they would look through the budget and say, you can't fill this position in the next budget because it's an ERIP. But the city did what it felt it had to do at those times. City manager.
Yep.
There's, I guess, so many different factors here as we've talked about, and I'm glad we're spending time on the pension issue because it's such a large, impactful issue to the city, both in terms of value and cost, and it will be going forward. I guess a number of different things to factor in, and this is not just for here, but for the record and for the public to understand. For instance, next week, some of us will be speaking at the chamber board meeting. We've done that before. And this is always one of the questions that comes up when they ask to understand how the city works and how the city's finances work. And there's a cost and a revenue side of the equation. For instance, with the ERIP, the Early Retirement Incentive, I was here for that the first time around. And what David was making reference to, it was a short-term winner and a long-term impact. Because the city had immediate needs to cut costs at that time, going back decades ago, because of the same things that the city has experienced for so long, some of the pressures that led up to financial urgency. And you were only allowed, for every 3 positions that retired in the ERIP program, you were only allowed to fill 2 of those positions. So it was, the savings were projected on losing 1/3 of the positions to cut costs. And that was unrealistic. It worked in the short term, but in the long term, it didn't work. And that's what you were making reference to there. Yes. Bigger picture, and I'm glad David disclosed the fact that he and I are both trustees or board members on the general pension plan. Remember, the city is the sponsor of all 3 of these pension plans, and that means we have to make that annual required contribution, and that also goes with it the balancing of employee contributions, earnings, costs that the pension bodies have, which, by the way, those 3 pension bodies are independent operating pension bodies. We don't control them. The city commission doesn't control them. So that's the way they are structured. But we remain holding that responsibility for that annual required contribution. But those employee contributions and earnings and expenses, plus and minus how you manage that, they vary over time, but in the range of maybe upwards to 20% of the total cost or value to provide. The other 80% comes from the city's guaranteed annual required contribution, which is a huge responsibility. Now, balancing the fact that costs and revenues are always part of any equation, the general fund, and as we mentioned, we're both board member trustees there. We've done a lot of work to balance and diversify the portfolio so that the earnings have actually increased or lost less in bad years, as you were making reference to. And you can see that's why the increase in the percentage on the general plan was the smallest of the 3 by far. We continue to try and put that kind of philosophy forward to the other bodies. But there's so many different factors in terms of the population of each group, the age, how many are coming in, how many are going out, where the other salary costs are. It's not as simple as it might seem on this, and that's what the actuaries all struggle with. But I will tell you a couple of major factors going forward, and I'm meeting with Baki next week, and it's just a reality. For when we start negotiating our next round of contracts, and that will probably be later this year, for the general fund, not for police and fire, but for the general fund and for new employees going forward, we're putting an item on the table that will indicate we do not want to pursue a defined benefit pension plan for those new employees. It will be some other kind of deferred comp retirement plan so that it's portable and so that it is more manageable and affordable, because a defined benefit plan, which is what we have here, which essentially guarantees you a benefit if you work this long and make these contributions, is a very and the most expensive out there. They virtually disappeared from the private sector, and they're disappearing from the public sector. And that's something that we have to consider doing in the near future just to help manage the cost side of that, and that'll bring down some of these pressures as well.
Yep.
There's also other things like pension obligation bonds, where you can finance a portion or all of your expense and liability that holds out there, and that's something we haven't really talked about or approached either, and that's for another day. But this is what we're looking at if we don't make other changes, if we don't do things on the revenue side to beyond that, and I'm talking about in the investment portfolios, if we don't do other things to reduce costs, but we are going to attempt to do some of those things to take some of that pressure off.
Thank you, David. I'll just close it out by saying, you know, the analysis here on the pensions and all the different city expenses, to me, is we face the costs as we know they're going to be, with the, you know, the variables that we know are at play. You know, look at them objectively, you know, with a straight face, and understand what that means that we need to do to take the bull by the horns, no matter how big the bull gets, and what are our marching orders to still be a financially strong and sustainable city, and be able to accomplish what we need to increase the revenue side, because we know what's happening on the cost side here. So again, it helps us with our marching orders and knowing how big of a nut we need to crack or not, you know, in the years going forward. Thank you.
Understood.
So now we go from the riveting conversation about pensions to legislative issues, which I'm sure you will be just as riveting, positive or negative, depending on how you look at it. Today is actually day 45 of the state legislative session.
It has to be 245.
What's that?
It has to be 200.
It feels like 245, but today is day 45 of the 60-day legislative session, which can only be coined as the 60 days of assault on home rule. And these are just a sampling of the many bills that are out there. I will say just, and I've shared this with several of you, I've been following the legislative process for many years. This year has probably the most negative impact on municipalities than I've seen probably ever. And so we are 15 days away, but as the property appraiser Marty Kerr mentioned, this is when things start to really happen, and they start to happen really fast. So there are several bills this year, and just so you know, this is in alphabetical order. We'll just go through it in terms of their subject matter. So we'll touch first on the expedited building permits bills. There's actually several bills pertaining to expedited building permits. These bills would shorten the review time that staff has to review permit applications, and it certainly will put a strain on our building division and on, frankly, all of our development services staff if these bills do pass. The two bills that are listed here are just two of, I think, four bills that pertain to building permits, and these bills are ready for their respective floors in both the House and the Senate. They have passed through all of their committees. Marty Kerr mentioned House Bill 7017. I won't spend too much time on that, although I will say that it is in committee hearing in about an hour from now, actually. There will be a committee hearing on that. That'll be the final committee hearing that bill goes through. As a reminder, that does provide a CPI increase to that second $25,000 homestead exemption. And yes, the impact would be $153,000 this year, but next year that will grow, and it'll grow, and it'll grow. The other bill, which has not moved as fast, thankfully, but does also pertain to homestead exemptions, is House Bill 7015. What that would do is that would put a third, just right off the top, a third homestead exemption on the on homesteaded properties tax bills. So that started out kind of like as gangbusters very early on. It has slowed down. It has not made that much progress in the House or Senate. But like I mentioned, these final 15 days are the days where things start to happen. So I'm trying to be as cautiously optimistic as possible. If that bill was to pass and be approved by Florida voters, and again, and both bills, 7015, 7017, do require 60% of Florida voters to approve these ballot measures, which would be in November. That impact would be between $5 and $5.5 million right off the top. So Mayor mentions that $1 billion yields $8 million in, or $7 to $8 million in tax revenue, ad valorem revenue. Almost $1 billion, a little less, but almost $1 billion will be wiped off if those bills, if that bill were to pass. And then even 7017, albeit a smaller impact this year, that is going to grow over time. So I'll leave it on that. The Live Local Act glitch bill. The Senate has passed that piece of legislation. The House is actually voting on through their committee, actually, their final committee today, I believe. Actually, I'm sorry. The final committee reviewed it on the 20th. So that analysis has just come through. Actually, Ray Lynn and I were talking about it earlier. So I'm going to go through that analysis to see exactly what that bill, where that bill stands at this point. But that is readying itself for the House floor. There are some good clarity that comes into it. There are some things that we wish probably would have been in that bill that are not. But we'll go through that and provide an analysis on that. Local business tax receipt. This bill, these types of bills have come every so often, every so many years. You've seen bills that have come to completely repeal the local business tax receipt, which is actually one of the proposals. Where the bill is currently is that it has been amended in a positive direction, but what it would do is that the revenue that we would generate in fiscal year 24 this year in local business tax receipt would be capped, and that any increases, whether it be via increases to the fees or increases to the number of businesses, would have to be captured, and then we would have to refund it.
Oh, my God.
So basically, fiscal year 24 would serve as that cap.
To refund it to who?
What was that? I'm sorry.
Refund it to who?
Refund it back to the businesses.
Oh, my God, you have to hire somebody to do that.
So at this time, on a positive note, the Senate bill has not moved forward. That's Senate Bill 1144.
Okay, good.
But 609 is moving forward. Now, what happens in the last 15 days of the legislative session is that this is when the House starts to send its passed bills over to the Senate for consideration. So even though the Senate bill hasn't moved, this does not mean that Senate will not take up this bill. Senate Bill 472, this is in regards to sovereign immunity. What this bill would do, it would seek to increase the cap on the payment of judgments against government entities such as municipalities from $200,000, which is the current, to $400,000 per individual, and from $300,000 to $600,000 per instance. This bill also does provide for the annual adjustment of the cap to reflect changes to CPI. CPI seems to be a pretty popular thing in the legislative process this year. And that would begin in July of 2029, and then it would be recalculated every 5 years thereafter. So what this bill would do is it would automatically bring those caps to 300, 600, and then starting in 29, we would see a potential CPI increase on top of that. The Senate bill will be heard in its second committee stop today. And the House companion is still waiting to be heard in its final committee stop. Our lobbyists have indicated that this bill seems to have slowed and potentially, hopefully, is not going to move forward. But again, final 15 days, all bets are off. There are several bills that are pertaining to both the ability for municipalities to charge residents outside of the municipal boundaries a surcharge on utility bills. Currently, we charge 25% on our utility bills as a surcharge for those customers that we serve outside of the city. What this would do is it would eliminate that surcharge, and I'm sure Vin can speak to the value of that surcharge and what we're able to do with those additional dollars, and frankly, the fact that what our residents are currently paying for in their current utility bills is being, and off our tax rolls is actually helping to even out what the 25% would go to. It would also, there are some bills that would eliminate the ability for, or limit, I should say, not eliminate, limit the ability for those surcharges to go to the amount of money that we're able to put back into the general fund for administrative fees as well. And lastly, vacation rentals. Senate Bill 280, which further preempts our ability to regulate vacation rentals, has passed the full Senate. And that vote was along party lines. The House bill, and I sent some of that information yesterday. I guess I should be wearing a red shirt today, right, in honor of my red alerts. The House bill, I read the analysis several times. It is scary. I don't know how better to say it. It's just downright scary. Now, what I've spoken with our lobbyists about this, they do see a similar situation being set up as what happened last year, which is when the bills were so out of sync with each other, meaning the House and the Senate bill, that inevitably killed the bill or killed any action. They see that setting itself up again, but again, not to beat a dead horse, but 15 days is a long time for the legislative session to see what happens. So with that, I'll take any questions on legislative issues. I wish I had better news, but this is really where we stand for this year, and we currently will be providing additional red alerts and additional alerts as the legislative process continues.
Adam, I stepped out when you talked about the expedited building permits. What did you say the likelihood of those passing is?
So those bills actually are, I think they both are ready for the House floor and Senate floor. So they passed through their committees, and they're likely to see the light of day at the House and Senate.
That would create a consequence to not issuing permits within 15 or whatever days.
That is
plan
correct.
review and all that.
That is correct. Now, they have put in some safeguards for cities in the event that the builder, or the contractor would have to have some level of insurance on those in order to protect the cities if something were to go wrong in that review process. But nevertheless, it would put a significant strain on the development services team.
So look, you can look at it as strain, but to me, I look at it as the state is joining us who want, quick building permit review and issuance to say, hey, it's so important for the state of Florida, so important for your cities that, we're going to put some legislative consequence if you don't, issue things timely for the sake of the states and the residents here, investing in their properties and things and helping to grow our economy. So I think we ought to look at those deadlines and anticipate that's where they're going to be. That's where we want to be anyway, and ramp up obviously our staffing as necessary to do that. We know we have money in the building fund. We know we're making huge investments in Acela. We have the second floor build out of the library for all these departments. We're doing more than ever, more than in the past decades to get there. But I think you guys need to plan to ensure that you have enough staffing to get to that benchmark of turnaround time. And if that means 10 more people, it means 10 more people because we have the funds paid for by building permits to deliver that service. So I want to be the best city when it comes to issuing building permits timely. Again, all that we need to do, anticipate this. Let's have that be our benchmark anyway, whether it's a state law or not saying we need to turn it around in time. And let's just go on that. It's a great point of frustration. It also leads to code violations. People, don't get permits because of how long they expect it might take. So many different, results out of a slow system. And I know we're doing everything to chip away at that, but let's go at full speed. We need to.
I agree. I mean, look, we could say how bad there's so many bad bills, but as you were just talking, like there's a alert that just came over that they passed the bill for kids 16 and under can't, for social media purposes and bullying, they can't make accounts. So while there's so much negative, there is a lot of positive. And so I do appreciate, they work hard too. We elected them to be there. They make some really poor decisions, and then they make some really good ones. So thanks for finding that happy medium in the building permit. I think that there's a lot of sense in what you said. If we could do that with every bill, that would be great, but.
And Commissioner, you brought up a really good point. I do want to, I know there's a lot of negativity, but I will say as far as our representatives up in Tallahassee, both in the House and Senate, Senator Pizzo in the Senate, Representative Cassell, Representative Woodson are phenomenal representatives for us. I speak to them pretty regularly, and they're fighting for us. They really are, and certainly they're in an uphill battle given the political climate of Tallahassee, but they're not afraid to put on the armor and go to war for us in that effort. Okay, so Jonathan will continue with the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. So we have just a couple more slides. We'll open it up for questions before we turn to our discussion of looking at FY 2025. So this this came up a little bit when we were talking about pensions, but this is the current 5-year forecast as our office has put it together. A couple of caveats to sort of point out here. One, forecasts are always a point in time. We present the forecast as part of the budget. This is a slightly revised version of that forecast as we have seen things progress over FY 2024. Secondly, there are a lot of assumptions that go into a forecast. The purpose of the forecast is to paint a picture. You can tweak any of those assumptions in any way and change what this picture looks. What we attempt to do is, what is that overall picture looking like? And what you can see here, again, I mentioned a little earlier, as we transition the 2 CRAs at the end of 2025 and in 2027, there's some resetting of the city's funds and revenues. There's different money that's now going to stay with the city, but also money that we're not sending out, but also money the CRA is not coming back in, plus picking up everything that the CRA is doing so that there's no loss in services, so all those projects are maintained. So as you see, there's sort of like, you can see that sort of what I would call wonkiness between the revenue line in green and the expenditure line in blue. As we transition those CRAs, we'll get better data on exactly what services are coming in, what are we taking on, what do those final tax increments look like, those kinds of things, which will change this line. But I want to point you to the larger trend that the forecast shows, which is that both our revenues and expenditures are on that upward trend, but they hover close, and depending upon how you change those assumptions, the revenue surpasses the expenditures, the expenditures surpass the revenue, not that too far in the future. And again, it's based on assumptions. This forecast, for example, looks at a 5% increase in the property value for 2025 and 3% thereafter. We've been talking about, we've seen some higher single digit, low double digit increases. We stay conservative to say, look, what are those trends? How do we prepare for if there are any downturns, if those things don't come through? But we are equally conservative on the expenditure side. Most of the operating expenditures that are part of this forecast grow at 1%. And any of the department directors can tell you, a lot of those costs, 2, 3, 4, 5%. So we balance all of those things so that we're capturing those increases and we're looking at that overall trend. And again, that overall trend is, while the revenue line is increasing, the expenditure line is pushing up, if not going past that line. And that's why we continue to have to be those good stewards of the taxpayer dollars to keep those lines from crossing as much as we can do. And we pull on both sides. We pull on the revenue side with the increases in the value and the new sales and the new development, but we also have to be cognizant on the expenditure side. The cost of personnel that we talked about, those inflation costs, all of those are things we have to continue to monitor and be stewards of. And these are some of the things we look at as when we look at that forecast. This is the things we then say, okay, we see that trend. So what are some of the things we need to do to make sure we're not, that we don't get to that point, especially those things that are inside of our control. So as it says here, we look at that revenue generation, the development, but also preserving the revenue sources that we have. As Adam mentioned, the local business tax is a piece of that. If that revenue changes, we have to make up that revenue somehow, either make up the revenue or look at something on the expenditure side. We continue, as I mentioned earlier, to refine those citywide performance measures. This not only helps us make sure those departments are performing at all of those levels, but helps us to identify, where are things not working out? Is this program really reaching everything that it needs to? And if not, should it be restructured? Should it be changed? Should the funding be moved? That's how we make sure we're not spending money on things that aren't providing the services or the programs that our residents and our visitors are looking for. Yes, of course, Commissioner.
So on that slide, the prior screen,
Yes.
yeah. So I understand the projected revenue because you don't have a guarantee, right? You don't know that it's coming in. But couldn't you tweak your expenditures, because we do have control on that? So for example, the gap between, let's say, fiscal year 2026 seems so much larger. For example, I think the peak is at 380, and that's a projected.
Correct. Yep.
And then our expenditures at 370. And then it dips down as well. It seems like it's the same margin of difference. But then when you go to 2029, our expenditures seem to be exceeding that. Why wouldn't you tweak the expenditures so that you eliminate that gap in 2029?
So it's not so much a matter, I would say it's not such a matter of tweaking the expenditures as it's looking at them in the totality. Part of the challenge, as I mentioned, is that transition of the CRA. As some of the money stays, as different transfers go in and out, these is our best assumptions as what some of those expenditures are. As I mentioned, we talk about the forecast has a 3% increase for our employee salaries, for example. So yes, we could, if revenue growth, for example, is 7% instead of 5%, that would change this line. But again, on the expenditure side, we've looked at it at 1%. So while this gap is, as you say, is projected at this point around $10 million, as we see value over the next couple of years, as we finalize the transition of the CRA, we can take a look at any of those assumptions that are in there, but we are actually fairly conservative to sort of on the expenditure side intentionally so that we can see what are those trends, and then we can tweak them. As we have not yet, because we've been waiting for inflation to cool, we have not tweaked that 1% on the expenditure side. But we could, that's when we would ultimately end up probably tweaking up, because we've seen those increases over and over and over and over again. And as we look at the forecast as we start the process for FY 2025, that's exactly the kind of thing we're going to be looking at. Are those assumptions still accurate? For example, like I said, for 2025 and the forecast you saw when we did the FY 2024 budget, you would have seen a 3% increase. We've seen and we've heard, and this adjusts that to be 5%. Again, staying conservative, are we looking at those trends?
It's just projected.
It's just projected.
And it could be tweaked. It's like.
It can be tweaked, yes, absolutely.
Okay, because
Yep.
that's like that's very concerning, obviously. So I just noticed that gap in 2026, and the gap is far more greater than the gap on the negative side in 2029. So if that could be tweaked, which we can do if need be.
Correct,
To
yep.
prevent that from happening. I just wanted
Correct. And again, with the forecast, we can tweak those again to look at and say a different picture. What happens if the revenues, if the taxable value doesn't grow the way we expected it to? What happens if inflation continues or the rate hikes don't come down? All of those factors could be tweaked to paint a slightly different picture, but the trend is the same, is that these lines are going, and we are very concerned about if and when they will eventually cross and what that will mean. Pensions is a big piece of that. Health insurance, as we mentioned, is a big piece of that. So all of those assumptions can be tweaked, of course.
Just gonna put the record, I do not.
Excuse
I
me.
do not like this slide at all. Just saying.
Yep. Commissioner, let me jump in here, because the point is well taken, but the value in this is long-range forecasting based on assumptions, okay? The tweaking is what we do day in and day out, year to year on the shorter range, and trust me, we do that. This is to alert us to the potential for what can happen several years down the road if we don't manage some of these other big pictures over that time period. We do the tweaking all the time to keep us out of trouble. You remember not too long ago, coming out of financial urgency, every year at mid-year, no more hires, no more expending, no more buying paper, no more print, literally, no more travel. So that was more than tweaking. Those were major cost cuts after the mid-year point. We don't want to have to live that way, because it's hard to progress and move forward when you're constantly digging out of a hole. So we do the tweaks, but this is to alert us so we don't have to get to that kind of major tweaking. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. So again, just to wrap up this part of the discussion, these are, again, the strategies and things that we look at, as George was mentioning, that we tweak throughout the year, that we work on each year. Having seen that trend, how are we keeping our eye on those lines? How are we understanding what those costs are? That's the performance measures, making sure we're more, better, faster. We're doing things in a streamlined fashion. We're doing things as a city collaboratively. All of those pieces are critical to, as the city manager mentioned, keeping those lines in track and making sure that they don't in fact cross at any point in our future. That's our goal, and the forecast tells us that, and we can make sure that we're keeping an eye on those things each year and throughout the fiscal year as we go. So before we turn, Raylynn's going to lead a discussion for us next, as Adam sent around to the whole commission some questions. Raylynn's going to lead a discussion on us to get some of those priorities for FY 2025. But if there are questions on the presentation, I will take those now.
You did a great job outlining everything. Thank you so much.
All right.
Yep.
Raylynn.
Okay, perfect.
So here comes the lightning round. No, we'll try to go quick here. But this is really, I think, the important opportunity based on those 3 questions that were sent out earlier in the week. To give your feedback. What are the things that you are now thinking about that are bubbling to the surface in your minds as the things that need to be prioritized as we develop the fiscal year 2025 budget? And so as you take a look here, you know, we have the feedback that we received from residents during the strategic planning process and in the update of the strategic plan. And you see the words safe and clean came out as 2 of the priorities. We're talking about maintenance and renewal. Those are some of the things that you guys talked about and our residents talked about. And then how would we get there? What are some of the actions that we could take? And you see, again, the word cloud, where the things that resonated with our residents, job creation, investment, law enforcement. So you see those word clouds there. And now it's really your opportunity to let us know what 3 concerns or needs do you hear most from residents. And so we sent these out, and we hope you had a moment to think about them. We're just going to go through one by one, and Jonathan is going to capture on the pad over here your feedback, and then we'll use that for the department and office directors who are here as they're thinking about their budget. This will be one of the things that they consider. So what 3 concerns or needs do you hear most from residents? You're all out there talking to residents all the time, getting feedback. We need 3 things that you feel are really bubbling to the surface. And I guess I'll go ahead and start in commission district order here with our commissioner from District 1, Carol Shuham.
Thank you. And the resolution to all of these equals job creation. I'll just start with that. The first are permit delays and the inconsistency of permitting requirements, the inconsistent application. And that also results in permit delays. The second is code violations and the lack to date, and I know Giovanna's working on this, of proactive code enforcement. It still feels to residents that they're waiting for complaints to respond. So proactive code. And finally, broadwalk safety and safety and other violations. So broadwalk enforcement.
So enforcement of the beach regulations and specifically related to the Broadwalk are the things that you hear about. Okay, we've captured those. Let's go ahead and move on. I'll just go down the line. That might be the easiest. So Commissioner Gruber.
Yes, number 1 is lighting, whether it's lights that aren't working or just a lack of enough lighting. That would be number 1. Permitting as well, the permit process. I get daily complaints on that. And roads, interior roads in needs of resurfacing.
Road resurfacing.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Jonathan, you ready for me to move on? Okay, good. He's keeping up. All right, Commissioner Kalari.
So majority of my complaints are permit delays. The second highest is traffic speeding, roadway safety. And the third is trash bulk concerns, which I guess falls under code.
Okay, so traffic calming, traffic safety, speeding on the roadways, and then bulk garbage collections. And specific to bulk collections
A lot of it is garbage, but that's actually improved, believe it or not, but it's the bulk issues that we have
The mattress
mainly in,
The mattress problem.
Yeah, the mattress problem, and mainly in North Central area.
Okay. Joseph, are you listening? Yes. Okay, good. All right. Vice Mayor Anderson.
My number 1 is lack of affordable housing. There's not enough of creative enrichment programs offered in the communities. And also, number 1 now, since it's out there, the low enrollment of the city, city schools.
Okay, so enrollment issues in the city schools. We know that there is the discussion underway of redefining our public schools that's being led by the school superintendent, affordable housing, and enrichment programs within the community. Got those. Okay. Mayor Levy?
So yesterday, I did the State of the City at the Hollywood Hills Association and spoke about the street lighting, the progress we made a few years ago with the FPL-owned lights, the 2,000 we're doing now with Noresco, and despite the neighborhood having now enjoyed both of those deployments, almost everybody raised their hand feeling that there needed to be additional street lighting in Hollywood, so definitely street lighting as we look toward priorities for next year. Roadway resurfacing is another issue that affects clean and safe for the city. I think it's a huge priority for people. Some of it's repetitive. One of the things we didn't mention that I know is a priority for all of us as well is stormwater management / flooding. But all of these issues, permitting, code, they're all part of it. So the list is great, and it's really on point in its totality. It's hard to isolate the three, but if I had to peg three for next year's capital programs, I would say, and knowing what's already in the works for permitting, I would say,
I thought we were just on one.
Not a capital,
well, for me,
neighborhood concerns.
those are the priorities: street lighting, resurfacing, and stormwater management.
Great. Jonathan, you got those? Okay. Commissioner Biederman?
There are so many good ones to pick and listen to. I think the illegal dumping is one of the concerns of the neighbors and residents of District 5.
Code compliance and illegal dumping, okay?
Yeah,
With-
code compliance.
Specific to illegal dumping, got it.
Code compliance includes everything from broken
Right.
sidewalks to trees overhanging the roads and stuff like that. The amount of blue tarps that are in the neighborhood, which is also code compliance. But, we just have that roofing program, so maybe that'll reduce the amount of blue tarps in the neighborhood if code is, promoting that. The illegal parking was a big topic the other night, parking on lawns and stuff like that. So it's hard to narrow it down to just three, but I think everybody's covering a bunch of them.
No, I think that's helpful, and we've heard some themes here, so that's, I think, important for us as we all go forward. Commissioner Quintana?
My number one was housing affordability. Second is garbage, general. That's why Joseph and I have gotten to know each other so well. And then there's speeding through the neighborhood, donuts, lighting, all related to safety, sidewalks.
Okay. Got it.
Those are all related to safety.
Okay. Neighborhoods, we'll let the last one slip in there. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on because the next thing is really a follow to this. What 3 capital investments, now we're talking about a capital investment, can we make to prepare for the next 100 years? So we do programs and services, and then we do capital investments. Oh, did I
Yeah, that's
skip?
the third
Oh,
one.
I'm sorry, I turned 2 pages at once. Sorry, number 2.
Okay.
Sorry, I shouldn't have turned 2 pages. Thank you for catching me. All right, here we go. All right, so programs and services is the first one. So now we're really focused not on capital investments, but on actual programs and services you think we ought to be investing on. What do we need to increase funding for in fiscal year '25? And we can switch it. Sorry, can we move forward? Oh, I got it. Okay. Oh, well, there we go. Here we go.
Okay.
So what programs or services do you believe the city needs to fund or increase funding for in fiscal year '25? And we'll go the opposite direction this time. We're going to start with Commissioner Quintana.
I think we need to further develop community engagement programs. I'm so happy to see that so many of our materials are now coming out in multiple languages. I think we should formalize that somehow, if that means getting external translation or whatever we need to do, but I think building on that. I think we need to expand on social services, youth engagement, the creative programs that Vice Mayor Anderson spoke of, program for children, families, and seniors, and then a focus on health and wellness of our residents.
All right, Commissioner Biederman.
If we take into consideration the previous slide, I think that a lot of the concerns like the blue roofs and the sidewalks and affordable housing, and, it's kind of like in the center, right under law enforcement, affordable housing, I think that we could increase funding to help improve the neighborhoods and the affordable housing and through community development.
So increasing affordable housing programs or addressing kind of the issues with existing housing stock and really focusing on that. Understood. Any others that you want to mention?
No, I think,
Okay.
everybody's covered it.
Okay. Mayor Levy.
So with regards to programs and services, I can't really limit those to just programming. But as far as services go, I think we definitely need to increase the budget for communications and marketing. And that's to communicate to our own residents all that we're doing, all that they're eligible for, and all that they should know about Hollywood. So more communication, larger budget through CMed. The interlocal agreement and neighborhood pride programs, as Commissioner Biederman mentioned, community development needs to accelerate those programs. If that means more budget to manage, then that's what needs to happen, because, we have annual contributions by the county, for example, and from the state, and we need to expend those quickly, and if we are not, we need to immediately figure out why not and be able to overcome that. And I still don't think we're over the hump on implementation versus the money that's coming in and needs to be spent before we get in trouble with it. And all that goes to further what we need for the city. I don't want to call permitting programs and services, even though it really is. I know we're on the roll with regards to that. So I'm going to add parks as far as programs and services, more cultural, opportunities, more parks maintenance, parks operations, parks.
Okay. Got it. Vice Mayor Anderson.
Number one, I would say more communication with the police department. That was one thing that the community asked, that more interaction. We have the NTL, but more interaction with it. Also, more programs for the elderly.
Okay. Enhanced law enforcement communication on what's happening in the neighborhoods, and then programs for the elderly and seniors. Okay. Commissioner Kalari.
So I think that in order to move the city forward and strategically get funding to help address all these things, we need to really increase our grant writing abilities. And there's a lot of money that's out there. We need to focus a little bit more money internally to get the external funding. And that would cover pretty much everything, hopefully, that we've talked about today. But I think roadway and infrastructure is probably the top of my list. And then, of course, addressing our youth, seniors, and community engagement programs, whether it be through Parks and Recs, daily centers, to address the needs and wants, which will also help with our issue that we're dealing with for mental health illness. So.
Okay. All right. So community-based programs specific to sort of health and wellness issues in the community centers. And then the increased grant funding, or going after grant funding perhaps for those programs. Okay. Commissioner Gruber.
Yeah, I would say anything to do with affordable housing, anything that community development can do to get ahead of it. Well, no ahead of it. I mean, a lot of people are basically becoming homeless. So anything that we can do to do that type of programming, safety and security technology for the neighborhoods, like NPRs and stuff like that. Anything like that. I'd love to see, and I know it's in the pipe when we get the fencing, but an arts park activation. We have the nicest municipal amphitheater, probably in all of Florida. I'd like to see that activated at least as much, if not more, than Meisner and Pompano, our comp set, that over there feeds out to the businesses with some good stuff. And communication and marketing, I agree with my colleagues on that. As much as we can get out to the residents, the more the merrier.
Right,
Yep.
enhanced communication, arts
Yes.
park activation, affordable housing
Yes.
programs. Okay, and Commissioner Shuham.
I'd like to see a program of like a neighborhood pride. We've talked about this in the past, engaging residents in code compliance. And I loved Commissioner Quintana's comment last night about handing out the community development services available to residents that are having code issues. The next two are very specific to 2025. I think we really need to have a deep cultural, historic experience to celebrate our 100-year anniversary in the upcoming budget, and the CRA transition. I want to make sure that we are being very cautious as the CRA sunsets, particularly with all of the enhanced services that the CRA pays for. I remember when City Manager Keller took over, he said, we're not just going to meet it, we're going to beat it. And I think that we really need to focus on that funding.
Okay. All right, now we're on to our capital side of things. And this is really those physical projects that you think are important to invest in over the next 100 years. We all know some of the projects that we have going on. We've got more capital investment taking place in this city probably than in the history of the city currently. But are there things that you think we need to add to that mix or enhance within that mix of capital investment? So why don't we go ahead and we'll start in the center this time and we'll work out from there. We're going to go ahead and start with Vice Mayor Anderson.
Was that capital?
This is capital. So this is really the things
Fine.
that you think might need more capital investment in the city.
Okay, capital investment. Construction and renovation of the municipal buildings, schools, libraries, hospitals, park, recreation facilities, and community centers to meet the needs of the growing population. I think we need more recreation centers. We have them scattered around. Some were closed because they were older, so I would like to see more recreation centers, especially when we're dealing with the seniors. And we have the younger kids in the evening that come to the recreation center for after-school programs. And then we have the seniors for the early morning, and then they have to leave. So some kind of way we should find a place for the seniors and a place for the elementary kids.
So looking at our community centers and thinking about that overlap that takes place between the younger clientele and the older clientele, and how do we make sure that we have the appropriate centers to do that? We did, of course, have the Parks Master Planning process, and that may have been some of the feedback there. So we'll take a look at that and see.
Right, because during summertime, they have to close up the recreation center to the seniors because the kids are out of school, so there's no place for the seniors during the summer.
Understood. Okay.
Good.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Kalari.
So I only have two, and one I would like to see, as I mentioned at the commission meeting, and we talk about all the time, is more capital investment into seeking for commercial investment and going out with our properties, because that's how, obviously, by the maps we've seen, is how we're going to be able to generate funding to sustain our future. And I would like to see capital investments to our centers, like, for example, this one and the one at David Park and all of our community centers, Martin MLK Center. They need some love, and that will encourage people to come more.
Okay.
So we talk about bringing, community engagement. It needs like a makeover. like move the
So
bus.
capital investment in our existing community centers, and then looking at opportunities for public-private partnerships to
Yes.
invest in some of the
Yes.
needed capital.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Gruber?
Agreed with the investments in the community centers and our different parks, Rotary, Driftwood, places like that, here as well. Roads and lights, that really, just back to what the residents are asking for, really, roads and lights. And septic to sewer, yep, of course. And whatever we can do to protect our shores and our coastal and wherever sea level rise affects us.
Got it.
I only
Yes.
gave two, but I'd like to give a third one, and especially what we're experiencing today, cybersecurity and hardening, because, I mean, we're all at loss here with what's happening and protecting our investments. So cybersecurity, I think, would be huge.
All right, got it. All right, Commissioner Shuham.
So very similar to Commissioner Gruber, I have, the first two are just water, everything water. Our stormwater management plan to really, invest, and this, it could be 100 years by the time we get through that one. The second is everything having to do with sea level rise, including septic to sewer, strengthening our shorelines, and also with respect to sea level rise, ensuring that our drinking water stays safe from saltwater intrusion. And number three is our community centers and our life safety structures like fire stations and things like that. I talked to Gus a little before. Certainly 1301, something will have to be done there. So upgrading our community centers. And then for all of this and everything else we've talked about today, we really need to ensure maintenance. And I know Jonathan talked about it, but we cannot build new buildings and big, shiny, beautiful new things without long-term game plans to maintain them.
Okay, so we're talking about maintenance of community centers. You got it? Okay. And now we're going to go down to the other end, and we'll go to Commissioner Quintana.
So some of what I was going to say has already been said. So septic to sewer, we have places that are commercial spaces that cannot be expanded because there's no sewer there. I'm not sure how we prioritize that, but it should be prioritized. I had environmental resilience and nature-based solutions. So we have the $2 billion stormwater master plan. I'd really think that needs to be a priority, and incorporating more nature-based solutions into that, because there's not that much in there at this point. And then the other thing that I don't know how to articulate, but I think, how do we create a city where people can get to all their basic needs without having to leave the city? An economic development question, I suppose, I don't know how to articulate that, but I have to leave the city many times for things that I want, and I would like to be able to get it here.
Okay. That may be more on the program services side in terms of how do we reach out to those providers, but if there are specific things that you think the city ought to be providing, capital-wise.
I think it has to do with planning.
Business attraction?
Yeah, and planning, like the right kind of business to meet the needs of the people who live here.
Understood. Okay.
Listen, there's a smoke shop on every corner.
Depends on what your needs are.
Precisely what I mean. Yeah, well, I know, but I mean, most people need more than smoke shops, there's basic human needs.
Maybe we need a state preemption on that.
All right. Commissioner Biederman, you want to wrap us up here?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the common theme is septic to sewer, right? Stormwater. I made some notes. Septic to sewer, stormwater management, and parks.
Parks,
And now Mayor Levy wanted to.
So like my colleagues, 100-year outlook, certainly stormwater and water management. Septic to sewer, critical both economically and environmentally. 100-year picture, hopefully way less than 100 years. Resiliency is the overarching theme of all of that. And then I'll add smart city technology, laying the groundwork for that if we're looking at 100 years, and specifically as it relates to our role in providing public safety. So infrastructure for CCTV and all the different public safety / smart city infrastructure that we need to plan and start deploying so that we can enjoy the technologies as they come in.
Right.
And to the extent we can plan for that and have a plan for it to help guide that implementation in the city and to benefit things like traffic management and everything, public safety, the whole nine, then I think that's something that we need to start looking into, continue to
Okay.
look into.
Investment in smart city technologies.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much. That is some great feedback for us to all really work on as we move into the real budget season, and each of the departments and offices start thinking about their budget plans. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jonathan to do next steps.
Thank you, Raylan. So just to wrap up for where we are and where we're headed from here. So before I get into next steps, I do want to just give a quick thanks to the staff of the Office of Budget and Performance Management. They do, they do incredible work for each department every day and help us with obviously putting the budget together, putting all of this together, and answering those questions that come up from you. And so a big thanks to the entire staff of our department who does amazing work each and every day, and I couldn't do what I do up here without them and their support. So a big thank you to all of them. So just, again, looking ahead, so we're having, of course, our kickoff today. The capital workshop, as well as the operating workshop, will be scheduled in the months of May and June. You'll be, look for those invitations coming soon as we finalize that schedule. And then, of course, we will get our taxable value, our preliminary taxable value on June 1st, and our final taxable value on July 1, which will lead to the setting of the maximum millage, what it cannot exceed, at the July 3rd commission meeting. And then we will have our first public hearing on September 12th. You'll be seeing an invitation for that soon. We're limited in when we can hold it, so it has to be held on this day. And we will likewise be scheduling the second public hearing a few days, after that to finalize the process. And so that is where we stand today. Thank you all very, very much for your participation. Mayor, the city manager, if you have anything to wrap up.
I'd just like to say that I think it was a great fiscal kickoff today. I think you have a very focused and an appropriate list of priorities that the City Commission provided in the 3 questions. And I anticipate that when this capital workshop proceeds and the operating budget workshop, that you'll really focus on that list of needs, because that's what we are hearing and what we know the city
Absolutely.
needs. And that means, city manager and everyone, that anytime we have discretionary funding across the departments, that is the top priority on things. And as you look at competing priorities that the staff perhaps is introducing, I think you need to engage us specifically at the capital workshop and an operating budget workshop, where if you're deciding that or recommending that certain dollars be used away from this list, we need to know about that so we can decide if that is a greater priority than what's on this list. I want us to be, as a city commission, more engaged up front on the discretionary decision-making on where we need to put our pound for pound. Just as a very small example, when engineering proposed to spend some of our sidewalk dollars on a new sidewalk between Hollywood Boulevard and Pembroke Road along Park Road, and the city commission said, ho, 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 we'd rather have it on Johnson Street between, I-95 and 29th Avenue. That was a more critical need. I want to make sure that as you're making some calls internally, that you engage with us earlier before it's, too late, so that we can help choreograph, because we're very aware of where the needs are.
No, appreciate that, because one of the issues is, and it's true what Raylan said, there is more going on in this city ever in the history. The more things that you've got happening, the harder it is to keep that all aligned sometimes too. So we'll be happy to share that information. The communications is key, and we'll do that earlier. Yep. Right. Other than that, appreciate everybody, especially budget, finance, the city manager's office who's participated in this. Good start. Now we've got a lot of work to do and putting all the pieces together. So thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Let's go Hollywood.